Hi, welcome to The Shed. I'm here with Mike Pinto, a Chicago-based jazz guitarist, and we're going to learn a little bit about what makes him tick, how he approaches jazz, and a little bit about his history. So, Mike, how did you get started playing jazz?
Well, there was always jazz music playing around the house when I was a kid because my dad was a fan of jazz guitar. So Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, George Benson records were always kind of playing around the house. And when I was approaching high school age, I was considering my options for high school, and the public high school in my area did not have a jazz band in the band program. And I knew that I kind of wanted to be part of an organized band program. And as a guitar player, you know, when you're in elementary and middle school, you don't really have the opportunity to play guitar in like the concert band, you know.
Yeah.
So the jazz band seemed to be my one outlet for that, and so I chose to go to a private school in the area that had a jazz band. And so to prepare for that, I started learning all the jazz chord voicings with extensions and tried to get my reading back up to snuff and just try to prepare for the auditions for that. And that worked out for me. I made it into the band, and then just kind of continued working on playing jazz music from there.
What did you use when you were trying to learn like the jazz voicings and stuff? Was it just like private lessons or?
Well, yeah, I was taking lessons, and also there's a book which I have not reviewed and revisited in a long time, but it's an very old school method book called. Well, there was two of them. The first one I worked in it was called the Ronnie Lee Guitar Chord Method Book. That might not be the exact title, but it's the Ronnie Lee book, and that's like your basic. For those of you who play guitar in the audience, those are your basic bar chords. So that teaches you about major, minor, dominant 7, with both a 6th string root and then a 5th string root, like super basic bar chord terminology. So that was sort of how I got my bar chords together initially. And then when it came to learning the jazz chords, there's another book called the Mickey Baker Jazz Guitar Method Book, and I think there's a whole series of them. I don't know how many volumes there are. I think I probably just worked out of books 1 and 2, but it's just a basic approach to adding extensions to those basic bar chords from the other book, So that's where I remember learning about 6th chord, major 7 chord, dominant 7 chord, 13th chord, sharp 5 chord.
So like where the different chord tones are around that shape.
Yeah,
and
basically.
like what they sound like.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that book still sort of, even though I haven't thought about that book in a long time, the way that book is organized sort of influences the way that I organize the fretboard and visualize those chords on the fretboard, because something about the way that book was laid out and the way I learned all those things. Visualizing the 13th versus the sharp 5 on a given dominant chord, being able to see it relative to the other chord tones on the neck, I'm able to do that sort of because of the way that I learned those chords in the first place, I think, So, but yeah, it was those two books. And then teachers, of course, that would reinforce and add more to the mix. But yeah, I specifically remember some of those voicings from that Mickey Baker book in the first place.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's super old. I don't know if it's in print anymore or not, but I got my copy at home.
David Baker's younger brother or
that's
something.
Right, yeah.
All right, so what were some of your influences besides George Benson, Joe Pass, Wes Montgomery that you had playing in the house? What were some other influences you had when you were coming up?
Well, some of them, whether they were conscious or not in the early days, before I was even actually interested in playing jazz on the guitar, when I was just hearing music around the house, Christmas time would come around and the Vince Guaraldi, the classic Charlie Brown Christmas record would come out, and I still love that record. You listen back to that, and I've always loved Vince Guaraldi's playing, and that's actually sort of been an influence for me. Not just that Christmas record, but his other albums as well, because Vince was just a master of simplicity in making intelligent note choices against the harmony and in very clear swinging phrasing.
Yeah, super clear rhythm. You can transcribe that easy.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So that's always been an influence for me, and that's something I kind of try to strive for in my playing is clear swinging rhythm and like a sense of accessibility and simplicity in my playing. So that my dad also really loved all those early Stan Getz bossa nova records. So those are always playing around the house. So you'd hear Charlie Bird's rhythm guitar stuff and some of that in a lot of that music. And then when I started kind of getting into developing my own tastes in jazz, they sort of tended towards the more modern kind of players. So John Scofield has always been a big influence on me. I love Bill Frisell's playing too. Bill Frisell's style is so unique that it doesn't seem to be the most directly accessible in terms of learning from him and incorporating it into your own style, because he plays in such a unique way that at least I feel like anytime I try to sound like Bill Frisell.
Oh, you sound like Bill Frisell.
Yeah, I'm just trying to copy him, and I don't really want to do that, And I love his sound so much. It's just I sort of want to respect it as its own thing, Yeah. But so Bill Frisell's great. and then as far as non-guitar players go, I've always really been into Chris Potter's playing. I mean, his saxophone playing is just, fantastic. I love all those mid-'60s Blue Note records with Wayne Shorter and Freddie Hubbard and Herbie Hancock. So, so the Wayne records, in particular, I remember when I was, in high school, kind of getting into Speak No Evil, Juju, what are the other ones? Empyrean Isles is a Herbie Hancock record. I'm kind of blanking on some of those other classic Wayne records from the mid-'60s, but all that stuff just really spoke to me. I love, the Wayne was great at writing melodies that are very tuneful and sort of catchy, but juxtaposed against sort of unusual chords, and I love that I love that kind of stuff. I love studying the way that harmony moves against melody that seems diatonic and real kind of catchy in a real basic kind of way. I love that kind of stuff. So so that. Brad Meldau's piano playing I've always really loved, and the way that his trio plays and the interplay amongst the trio is just really inspiring. So I mean, the list goes on, but those are some people who come to mind to start.
All right. So what are you listening to currently?
The album I've been listening to most lately is a record by a local Chicago drummer named John Deidemeyer, and we play together in a few contexts. And he's great. He's a great drummer, and some of the other players on the record are some of my favorite Chicago musicians as well. And it's great. It kind of runs the gamut of different kind of styles. There's some real edgy kind of modern jazz kind of sounding stuff on it. There's also a vocalist on the record who's wonderful, and she, sings on, I don't know, maybe half the tunes. But some of the tunes have lyrics, and they sort of tell a story, and there's, it's got a different kind of vibe, more of a peaceful, serene kind of vibe than the edgier stuff. But it's just great. Just the peaks and the valleys are just wonderful. And from start to finish, it's just a really solid record, and I've just really been enjoying listening to it a lot.
Cool. So what album or solo should you think that like all beginning jazz musicians should dig into and like transcribe and just live?
Beginning jazz musicians?
Beginning jazz musicians.
Well, I guess, the default choice that a lot of people say is to check out the Miles Davis Kind of Blue record.
Yeah.
And I would probably agree with that. It's a classic on so many levels. One solo on that album that I transcribed when I was much younger is not one of Miles' solos, but it's Wynton Kelly's piano solo on Freddie the Freeloader.
Yeah,
classic. It's just super swinging. The eighth note language is great. It's just totally rooted in the jazz style. It's bluesy, so it's accessible to a beginning player who's familiar with not many scales yet, but totally makes the changes, and there's some subtle kind of hip stuff in there, some sharp 11 sounds and some of the dominant chords and stuff. It's really cool, I would also say in that vein, if you're sort of checking out Kind of Blue, I would say to check out recordings by the first Miles Davis quintet. So Miles's first quintet was with Coltrane and Red Garland, Philly Joe Jones, and Paul Chambers, and those are those recordings. Which I don't have the story exactly straight, but there's 4 of those records: Cookin' with the Miles Davis Quintet, Steamin', Workin', and Relaxin'. I think are the 4. They were recorded over a very short amount of time to fulfill a contractual obligation. I think they just slammed out all these records, But those records are just like those are sort of like the definition of small group jazz. If you're going to show up on a gig and expect to just play a tune, those recordings are recordings of what that sounds like.
Yeah, like if you're going to play If I Were a Bell, it's got to start like how they start If I Were a Bell.
That's true. Yeah, because those are definitive versions, but also just as a template for any tune you're going to play. Maybe there's an intro, maybe there's not. The head gets played. There's a series of solos, interaction in the solos. Trading probably at the end, like that classic formula of how a jazz combo performance goes down. Those recordings are great examples of that. So those are great. And then another record that I would say, which is maybe not like a beginning listen for a beginning jazz student. But I've always been a huge fan of the Gary Burton record, Like Minds, and I always recommend that to people as well. It's Gary Burton, Chick Corea, Pat Metheny, and then Roy Haynes and Dave Holland. And it's just great. You've got the 3 comping instruments, guitar, piano, and a vibraphone, sort of negotiating their way through all the music together. And it's really great to hear how they stay out of each other's way, how they step out at certain times and interact with each other. And and the playing is superb all around. So that's a
So what and how do you practice, and how is that different than like how you practiced and what you practiced when you were first starting to play?
Well, yeah, it's different now. I mean, when you become a working professional adult person, your practice time is just by definition is sort of limited compared to when you're in school, either in high school or college. So it's different now, certainly. I guess when I was first really trying to get my act together with playing jazz music, probably the best thing you can do is transcribe solos. And that's true in a lot of ways, but it's also just true historically. Like if you go back to the 50s or even in the 60s, how did musicians who wanted to learn how to play, how did they learn? I mean, certainly you can take lessons if you hook up with a great player in your area who plays your instrument. People did that, but there was no college for jazz, and there were no Jamie Aebersold play-alongs. What did you do? You would buy the record, of somebody who you were into. You listen to it, blows your mind. Say, I want to learn how to do that. So you learn how to do it. You play it. You figure out how to play it. You play the record. I should be more clear. You play the record, and then you learn how to play on your instrument what's being played on the record. And if you do that enough, if you just solo after solo after solo, you learn how to play. You also you try to transcribe the chord changes while you're learning it too, so you learn what the harmonies are relative to the notes that are being improvised. And you kind of can't help but build up some momentum and build up some vocabulary of how to play in that style of jazz music. So transcribing solos is big. I did a lot of that. I mentioned that Wynton Kelly piano solo from Freddie the Freeloader. I mean, that was probably one of the first things I ever transcribed.
That's one of our guided transcription sheets. So if you dig that one, check out our guided transcription sheet on that.
Good. Well, it lines up nicely.
Yeah, it did. Thanks.
So yeah, that's a classic, But anyways, yeah. So transcribing solos is huge, and it's you should transcribe people who you like, If you play the saxophone, you play tenor, and you like listening to Lester Young, transcribe some Lester Young solos, If you start with something that's sort of beyond the technical capacity of your instrument, it might be a little frustrating, Yeah. So if you're a tenor player, and you're getting your act together on the horn, you probably don't want to start with some Coltrane that's at a burning fast tempo. It might not be totally realistic,
Yeah.
But start with music that appeals to you, that you like, and if the Coltrane appeals to you, then go for it, try it, Just know that if it's a little frustrating for you, then maybe then go to the Lester Young and then come back to the Coltrane next,
okay.
in a little bit. So it's cool,
Yeah.
So transcribing is huge, that's a big one, And then I was also learning tunes, learning the repertoire and the vocabulary of what people play, the kinds of tunes that people play when they're playing jazz. Like that's huge too. If you're going to expect to, you want to get good at playing jazz, you should get good at playing the tunes that people play when they play jazz. So that means that the repertoire of standard tunes that all or most jazz musicians know.
And was that motivated because you wanted to get gigs? Like, I need to know these tunes so that I can get out and play some, or you just like, I need to know these tunes so that I can move to the next step?
I mean, at the time, I wasn't necessarily thinking about gigs so much, because this is like early high school me,
Yeah.
So at that point, I guess I wasn't, I guess I wasn't that. I started playing gigs when I was in high school, so but it wasn't even really jazz gigs so much at that point. So yeah, so for me, it was just more the knowledge of like, let's take one of those mid-'60s Wayne records, like the album Speak No Evil. Every tune on that record is a classic, So I wanted to play all those songs. I wanted to play Witch Hunt. Learn that intro.
Yeah.
And on the head. Is that Witch Hunt?
I get most of those modal heads confused.
I'm pretty sure that's Witch Hunt. Yeah. If it's not, I apologize. I'm mixing it up with another tune. But anyways, I like those melodies. I wanted to learn how to play them. So of course I learned how to play those. I was actually more interested in tunes like that than I was in like the standard Cole Porter, George Gershwin kind of repertoire from the start. But that was the thing. I was following my interest. I liked the way those tunes sounded, so that's what I worked on. And then I had people tell me, especially when I got to college, like, well, yeah, but there's all these other standard tunes you need to know how to play as well. If you want to get gigs. So at that point, then it was like, maybe I should learn these standards. And when I say standards in that regard, I'm talking about standards that come out of like the show tune repertoire, as distinct from tunes that were written by jazz musicians, like Wayne Shorter compositions. And then so at that point it became motivated by that. But the more tunes you learn, not only are you building a repertoire of tunes that you can play when it's time to play a gig or go to a jam session or whatever, but you're also starting to recognize patterns from one tune to the next, and that's huge, because there's only so many chords, right? I mean, there's a lot of them, but there's still only so many, So, you're playing one tune and, like you start learning the tune Just Friends, for instance, okay? And so it starts on the 4 chord. Let's say, let's say you're playing the tune in G. The first chord is C major, and then it goes C minor 7, F7. Those 2 chords should go to B flat major 7, but that's not what the tune Just Friends does, right? It goes F7 to G major 7, okay? That chord change, it's not the absolute most common chord change, but it's pretty common, So if the first time you encounter it is when you're playing Just Friends, and then you're playing some other tune and some other tune and some other tune, and you start to see it over and over again. Oh wow, I remember that. I know how to play that chord change.
The 2-5 to flat 3 going to the 1.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's the move. So that's just one example. But the point is, if you see that, you recognize it, and then you start to see it as a pattern by seeing it in other tunes as well, you're building a vocabulary of
harmonic mechanisms.
Yes.
All right. Yes. That's what we call it at the show.
Yeah, and that's what it is. That's what I mean. That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. Those movements, mechanisms.
Yeah.
The way that one chord moves to another chord, And when you start to see a given movement or mechanism over and over again from tune to tune, you're going to get better at playing it because you're seeing it over and over again. It's confronting you in a way where you have to learn how to deal with it, And so then the next time you deal with it, if you've worked out what to do on it, you got it worked out, And so that's learning tunes is a great way to get that part of jazz together,
Cool. And then how is that different from? And now it's just based on.
Oh, now, yeah. So now, as the aforementioned, professional working adult person with very little time to practice, now my practicing tends to be more targeted, where I'll sort of keep a list in my head of things that I want to be working on, and it's like way longer than there's things being added to it more rapidly than there are things being crossed off. I'll put it that way.
Gotcha.
But yeah, and basically a lot of it's motivated by things that I notice myself doing that are deficient that I want to get together. So that could be something that that I've worked on that. Or I should say something that I haven't ever worked on enough. Like I'll be on a gig and there's a certain kind of, I don't know. Let's say if it's this is not jazz now, but if it's like a pop gig and there's some kind of finger style thing, and there's certain little finger style patterns that I come up against once in a while where I go, well, I've never actually really worked on that. I sort of like fake my way through it. So then I'll say like, now I'm going to sit down and actually work this out. I'm going to listen to a recording, like a James Taylor recording or something of, an example of somebody doing that.
Yeah.
Work it out and then just practice it for a long time until I get it together.
When it comes back, you already got it on
I'm
your
ready.
fingers.
Right. Or the flip side of it is like relating to jazz. If I'm improvising, a lot of times I'll have an idea for something that my hands can't express. Which is probably the case for
a lot of people.
We've
all been there.
Yeah. And so, but I'll reach for it and try to do it anyways. And so in the middle of the solo, I try to go for something. And there'll be something that just never quite works out. I'll start tripping over myself in a funny way where I my picking doesn't line up with whatever the left hand is doing, And it always bugs me. The idea crashes and burns and I move on to the next idea, But if that happens enough times, then I say, I got to work that out. So then I'll sit down and I'll work it out. I'll try to recreate whatever it is that's getting screwed up when I'm actually on a gig playing. And then say, okay, well, what's the problem here? And I'll find that it's, there's a hiccup in it. Like there's one too many notes for this sequence to work out properly, or one too few notes for it to work out properly. And then once I solve what the problem is, then I sort of like isolate it as its own little exercise or lick or etude or whatever you want to call it, And then I'll just practice it a whole bunch until it becomes something that I can play consistently and reliably and not screw up. So my practicing now basically consists of that, of like targeted little things that I know I need to be working on. And that's a given practice session will be all that.
That's a great thing for anybody at any stage in their playing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it can be a little bit. I think it'd be kind of overwhelming to be presented with the idea of, here's everything.
Yeah, you're right.
Here's everything you're gonna need to do ever to play jazz music. Go ahead. How are you gonna start?
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like letting your interests guide you is good. It may not be the most efficient approach. Like, somebody might get together some cool lick they learned on a John Scofield recording or something, but they don't know how to comp a 2-5-1. That would be bad. Like, you should know how to play a 2-5-1, But the thing is, if learning the Scofield lick really motivated you, and it got you really excited about playing, and then somebody says, hey man, that lick is like a 2-5 lick, you should really be able to comp that too. You go, oh yeah, I guess I should, You actually have a reason to learn to do that then, because you're motivated by whatever it is that inspired you in the first place. So
inspiration and then success, and that inspires more learning.
Yeah, it's like there's people talk about like a vicious cycle, downward thing. This is like What's the opposite of vicious?
I don't know. It's a glorious.
Yeah, the glorious cycle of inspiration, success. You go, yeah, I can do this, and then it inspires you to move on to the next thing,
Awesome.
So
what's the biggest problem that you see with beginning jazz musicians?
I would say the biggest problem is not being familiar with the way the music sounds in the first place. I encounter a lot of both college students and like high school students, if I take on a high school student privately or do a clinic at a high school or something, who are very earnest about wanting to play jazz because they're either they're playing in their high school big band or something, and they like the sense of community and the it's all centered around this idea of playing jazz music, but they're not actually listening to it, and so in my teaching I'm always sort of relating jazz to the idea of it being a language. The form of it is different. Instead of it being spoken words and grammar and sentence structure, it's notes and put together in different ways. But really, a lot of the aspects of language are still analogous to actual verbal language, written language. And so, imagine if you were trying to learn French, but you never heard anybody speak French.
Yeah.
It would probably come out sounding a little bit weird, wouldn't it? So, if you immerse yourself in the sound of it, they say that if you're going to learn a language, the best way to do it is just go to the country where they speak it and just live there for a while, and eventually you'll get your act together and you'll learn how to speak it. Not that I have that experience, but they say that that's true. And it's true with jazz too. If you listen to it all the time, the idioms, the stylistic characteristics, all that stuff is going to start to be absorbed into your brain, even if it's on the subconscious level. And then when you start to try to make it conscious by transcribing, like we talked about earlier, it's going to be a much more intuitive experience for you because you already sort of are steeped in the idea of what the music is supposed to sound like.
Yeah, just shooting in the dark and going like, okay.
Yeah, right. You need to have a reference. You need to have a point of reference of like what this music is supposed to sound like, And then when you get to a level where you're like really digging in on your instrument, you really want to sound great, then you start getting into the specific style characteristics of certain players, So you spend a whole lot of time listening to just George Benson if you play guitar, or if you play trumpet, you just listen to Woody Shaw for a while or something, And like that study of like what makes a certain player sound a certain way, then you start to cop those aspects of their playing and your own playing, and then you move on to another player, and then eventually you end up kind of sounding like yourself. Hopefully, is the goal, But but listening is the biggest thing.
So you're a college teacher. We're at a college.
Yes.
I have a lot of students that are going to want to go to college for music. What do you look for in an incoming freshman?
Well, ideally, you'd see a combination of characteristics that would be good, and that combination would involve good time. That's probably the foremost thing, I would say. Even if it means deficiency in these other areas, if somebody has good time, that's a good sign. So good time, good reading skills is great, and then as it relates to jazz specifically, if you're dealing with an instrument like guitar or piano, knowing chord voicings thoroughly, so you're not scuffling for, if you're presented with a C minor 9, like be able to play that.
Not just playing the root.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or like a C note or like a C major triad or something. Like know what the suffix of the chord means. And then in terms of improvisation, playing lines that make sense, that are in the harmony. I don't necessarily expect a college or an incoming freshman at college to be like totally burning, making all the changes all the time, but having some concept of how to navigate through harmonic mechanisms, like we talked about before, recognizing the way that chords move and knowing how you generally should be changing the notes you're playing to fit those chords is key. Now, not every incoming freshman has all that together, so you might have somebody who has great time and who's a great reader, and that's cool because that indicates a sense of discipline. If somebody can get their act together and be a good sight reader, and when I mean reader, I'm talking about seeing a piece of music for the first time, not having played it before, and just reading it at first sight. That indicates a seriousness in their approach and their study that allowed them to get to that point. And so even if they're not a great improviser, if you can get that reading thing together, it's not a guarantee, but it's it's a clue that they'll probably do well with improvising. But then on the flip side of it, if somebody is not a good reader at all, but they're a great improviser, that's good to see too, because it shows a seriousness of approach in terms of learning to improvise, and understanding chord progressions and negotiating your instrument well enough that you can actually express some of those ideas, So it's a combination of things. If you're deficient in all those things, that's not necessarily a good thing to be auditioning with for college. But certainly if you have some combination of those characteristics, that's a good thing. If you have all of them, even better.
Yeah. And then about time, do you have any tips for working on time? I know a lot of students, most of their questions are about like, how do I make my time better? I want to be swinging. How do I make my time better?
Right. Well, the classic advice is to use a metronome, and there's all kinds of creative ways you can use a metronome that aren't the standard. Set it so that it clicks on every beat. I mean, the most obvious one is, okay, so let's say you're practicing a swing that's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of the metronome going cut the tempo in half and perceive it as being clicking on 2 and 4. So instead of it's going to be that'll reinforce the feeling of the backbeat as you're practicing along with it. And also, it makes you, even if only marginally so, it makes you a little bit more responsible for keeping the time yourself, because every other beat, there's no click, so you have to make sure you're playing in time, Then you could cut the tempo in half again and have the metronome click only on beat 2 of every bar, only on beat 4. Now you're talking about very slow tempos as far as the metronome marking is concerned, Yeah. But at that same tempo, that's a pretty slow tempo as far as the tempo is concerned. As far as the metronome is concerned, you're just perceiving it as being beat 4 against a quarter note pulse.
So you're slowly putting more responsibility on you to keep time, and then less on the metronome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that helps you with your feel and your time.
Well, and that's the other side of it too. That's just the metronome part of it. That helps you on a real basic level. That helps you learn how to not drag and how to not rush, those are essential things to be able to do. But to make your playing feel good, like you said, how do I work on my time? How do I work on my feel? There's other implications there, and that goes back to the idea of listening. The more you listen to the music, the more you understand. Like even that little line that I'm singing, I am not going, I'm not singing all the notes at the same volume, right? There are notes that are accented, and then there are notes that are sort of just like, regular notes that are played like normal, and then there are notes that are almost ghosted that you barely hear. When you listen to great jazz players play, that's what you hear. That's the sound of jazz lines, but that's a concept that kind of goes over the heads of a lot of people if they're not listening. When you listen to the music, you hear that kind of stuff. So then when you start to copy that sort of thing, and you're doing it in a way that locks with the metronome so that you're not rushing or dragging, that's when your feel improves. When you start to bring out the syncopated feel of certain accents, certain ghosted notes, manipulating the feel of your eighth notes, like internal eighth notes in the middle of an eighth note line are going to be a little more straight than like the eighth note at the beginning or the end of an eighth note line, 2, 3, 4. There's like straight eighth notes in there mixed in with the more heavily swung ones, And it's the variety of rhythms that sort of creates the spice and creates the interest in a line like that, All that stuff exists apart from the metronome. The metronome's just a starting point. From there on out, it's more of a stylistic thing and interpreting what you hear in a way that allows you to transfer it to your instrument.
All right, so it's a question we ask all of our artists is, can you share a lick, a harmonic mechanism, or a melodic device, and give us an idea of how to, work on it and work it into our playing?
Well, I've had a lot of students lately who have been really interested in pentatonic scales. And the ones who've been interested in it have been the non-guitar players, which is funny because, because the first thing you learn when you're a guitar player is, as you learn the pentatonic box, And so for a long time, I didn't want to have anything to do with pentatonics because I was like, no, man, I'm a serious guitar player. I'm not going to play pentatonics because that's only what, people who don't know how to play jazz know.
The dad scale.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm not going to play like that. I'm going to do all this other stuff that's fancier and cooler, And to an extent, I still kind of feel like that. But I've wised up in recent years, and you listen to, like I mentioned, Woody Shaw earlier. Woody Shaw plays pentatonic scales all the time, and what you realize when you start, talking to other instrumentalists, pentatonic scales aren't necessarily easy to play on other instruments the way that they are in guitar. Guitar, they're just so visual and like box shaped, on the fretboard that it's such an easy reference point that it is easier than other scale fingerings, But on other instruments, they're not necessarily easier. They're just another scale to play, So other instrumentalists don't have that sort of biased concept of, pentatonic scale, I'm going to scoff at that and work on other things that are heavier and, more intelligent than that, So I've had all these people who have been interested in pentatonic scales. And when you listen to Woody Shaw solos, he's playing pentatonics all over the place. And I don't claim to understand every iteration of pentatonics that he plays on all of his solos, you know. But there's one thing, there's a mechanism that has come up in lessons with some students lately that it's pretty cool. And it's pretty easy to manipulate, but it sounds super hip. So it's a good one to use for this. So let's say you're playing a 2-5-1. Hold on a second. You have to edit this out.
No, I'll keep it in. I'll slow this part down.
Oh boy. Okay, so let's say you're playing a 2-5-1. Let's say you're in B flat major. Easy starting key. So the 2 chords C minor 7, 5 chords F7, 1 chord is B flat major 7. And for right now, we'll just focus on the 5-1, so the F7 to the B flat major 7. A cool way to use pentatonics, and again, this, you know, for you guitar players, you're going to see my hands. It's going to lay super easily in your traditional pentatonic box. But if you don't play guitar, you can still apply this as well. A cool way to use pentatonics is to look for all the pentatonics that are contained within any given scale. Okay, because in a diatonic major scale, there are 3 major, or if you're thinking of the minor pentatonics, there are 3 pentatonic scales contained within it. So, like in B flat major, you'd have a B flat major pentatonic, an E flat major pentatonic, and an F major pentatonic. So those 3 pentatonic scales all fit in the key of B flat
So
major.
off the
right?
1, 4, and 5.
Off the 1, 4, and 5, right. Now, generally, the plain old major scale on a major chord is not the coolest option to play. It generally sounds cooler. You have to know what you're doing, but it sounds cooler to play the Lydian scale, right? So that would effectively mean that on the B flat major chord, B flat major 7 here, you would play an F major scale. I'm thinking of it as B flat Lydian, but it's all the notes from F major. So that would be. So then you have to think, all right, well, what are the 3 pentatonics that come from F major? And that would be the 1, 4, and 5 still, right? So it would be F, B flat, and C. So F and B flat, those pentatonics are the same that came from B flat major, but instead of that E flat major pentatonic, we have a C major pentatonic, okay? And the C major pentatonic is going to contain an E natural note in it, which is the sharp 11 of a B flat major 7 chord. So this harmonic mechanism example is 2 parts. The first part is just that. On the B flat major 7 chord, play a C major pentatonic. Or you can think of it as A minor pentatonic if you're a guitar player and that's easier for you, you know. So here, why don't you play a B flat major 7 chord? So it has a cool sound, you know. I'm a couple times I got away from the pentatonic scale there, but mostly that was pentatonic, and it sounds hip, you know. Okay, so the other side of this then is this. What I'm about to say sort of involves a little bit of background knowledge of why this is true, but if you're going to play fully altered on the F7 chord, that would effectively mean that you're going to be playing the F sharp melodic minor scale, okay? There is only one traditional pentatonic scale contained within a melodic minor, okay? And that's going to be built off. It's going to be a major pentatonic built off the 4th scale degree. Okay, so if we're dealing with an F7 chord, we're going to play F sharp melodic minor on it. A B major pentatonic scale is going to be part of that sound. Okay, the relative minor of B major would be G sharp minor, which is a half step lower than the A minor pentatonic scale that we just dealt with on the B flat chord. Okay, so to sum it up, this harmonic mechanism that I'm showing you right here is on the F7 chord, you play a G sharp minor pentatonic, and then when the chord progression resolves to B flat major 7, you play an A minor pentatonic scale.
Down a fret.
Yeah, which is great for guitar players. You know, other instrumentalists have a little bit more work to do because your fingerings aren't going to be so, you know, transfer so immediately. But it's a really cool sound. So why don't you comp for me? Comp a bar of C minor, bar of F7. Bar of B flat major 7, okay, and I'll play this, okay. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not suggesting a specific sequence or pattern or anything. All I'm saying is play this scale and then play this scale, you know. But the fact that they're a half step apart you're going to have a lot of opportunities to go. Play an idea, play it up a half step. Play an idea, play a different idea that happens to be up a half step. You can phrase it any way you want, but it sounds pretty hip.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then so you can think about those isolated also. So you can play a tritone off the 2 of a major chord to get a major 7 sharp 11, and a tritone, a pentatonic.
Yeah.
Off the 2, or a pentatonic off the tritone to get a fully altered.
Yes,
sound.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those
yeah.
can be isolated, but they work really well.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting.
one.
Yeah, I'm suggesting them together because there's a half step relationship, and it sounds pretty cool.
Awesome.
Okay. You playing the head, or am I playing the head?
You can play the head.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, man. Sounds great.
You too, man.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.